Part 55. The Liu family's wife is so sweet. Author, Yoon. Chapter 541. Chapter 541 Achievements in Cultivation. Finally they stopped at the door of a restaurant. There were not many people inside and the store was clean. Luzes who turned to look at a few people and asked their opinions. How is it here? Everyone nodded and had no comments. Luzes who also nodded. He turned around and was about to walk in but found something was wrong, so he turned around and looked back, focusing his eyes on the two people standing at the back. He squinted at the two of them for a while, and finally showed a confused smile. The other three people also noticed the abnormality and looked over. Their expressions changed again and again for a while. They were all surprised, staring with disbelief on their faces. Gu Jinchu and Xiaoran smiled at them calmly. When did this happen to you? Zhang Wanan's heart for gossip ignited. How come you are so unaware? Tell me. Su Jiaojiao was looking forward to their stories. Tell me, hurry up, He Chiu was also very anxious. It's hard to say here, let's go in first. Gu Jinchu was very satisfied when he saw their expressions and their desire to gossip. He just wanted to see the reaction of these little when they saw them like this. The purpose is achieved. The group of people entered the store immediately. When the waiter came to help them order food, everyone was obsessed with gossip. Luzes who had no choice but to order the food by himself. He only knew Zhang Wanan's taste, not other people's, but those who asked them to order were too obsessed with gossip and no one paid attention to him, so he had to order alone. If the food was served later and they shouted that they didn't want to eat it or that they liked it, he would definitely hit their dog's head with a fist, because he had asked their opinions, but they were too obsessed and ignored him. After ordering the food, Luzes who glanced at Zhang Wanan, who was fascinated by what he was listening to. After thinking about it, he stretched his head forward. Let's listen. Everyone should listen. He would look out of place if he didn't listen. Gu Jinchu told him what he had confessed last night. He said it was nothing, but Xiaoran blushed when he remembered last night. She was supposed to be the one to confess her love, but Gu Jinchu confessed her love, which was good. This is probably what everyone said, that it is best that the person you have a crush on also has a crush on you. It turned out that they had been secretly in love with each other, and they thought they couldn't even be friends after confessing their feelings. After hearing what Gu Jinchu said, He Chiu started to stir up trouble and said, "Are you so hasty in confessing your love? Don't you have flowers or something?" This time it was rushed. I will make up for it in the future, because I have to seize the opportunity first. If I didn't confess last night, she might be someone else's one day. Then it will be useless to get more flowers. Gu Jinchu said, it's clear and logical. Besides, I don't like flowers very much. Xiaoran lowered her head and said. Tch, you are just trying to find a way out for brother Jinchu, and he must make up for it in the future. Su Jiaojiao also started to stir up trouble. Buletin, I'll ask you to help when the time comes. Gu Jinchu smiled and held Xiaoran's hand tighter. I've seen it a long time ago. You have finally achieved success. Congratulations for the first time. Zhang Wanan did not cause trouble and spoke seriously. Thank you. Xiaoran winked at her and said, Zhang Wanan and Luzes who made great contributions to their being able to be together. I just said that someone seemed to have something on his mind last night, but it seems that he is gone now. Luzes who looked at Gu Jinchu and teased him. Gu Jinchu smiled awkwardly and said, originally, I was going to come with you to get the menstruation, but Ran came over before I said anything, and then you left, and we became a couple, so I don't have anything to worry about anymore. Gu Jinchu changed from an embarrassed smile to a relaxed smile. While a few people were chatting and laughing, the food was already being served. The new year is here. I wish everyone a happy new year, and by the way, I would like to ask for recommendation votes and monthly tickets. I love you. End of this chapter. The Lu family's wife is so sweet. Author, Yoon. Chapter 542. Chapter 542, Should we consider getting together? While a few people were chatting and laughing, the food was already being served. No one had any complaints after the food was served. They all seemed to like it, and everyone devoured it. Luzes who smiled with satisfaction, thinking that these people were quite sensible. After eating and sitting for a while, the group of people got up and left. They had new arrangements today and would not hang out at the beach. This time Sujiaojiao and Hichayu were walking behind. Sujiaojiao glanced at the two couples in front and started to sigh. Hichayu glanced at her and thought she was tired, so he twisted the water in her hand and handed it to her, asking, "What's wrong?" Sujiaojiao glanced at his hand holding the water, took it over and said, "We singles are obviously looking for abuse. We should go in front." "But we don't know the route," Hichayu said. Sujiaojiao sighed again. None of them had made any strategies. All arrangements were made by Luzes Hu. Everyone had to follow him, otherwise they would not be able to find any good places. "You two can also become a couple." Zhang Wanan turned around and said jokingly, not taking it too seriously. "I think so." Gu Jinchu glanced at the two of them and agreed. "She, forget it. Him, forget it." The two spoke in unison with a tacit understanding and in a disdainful tone, as if neither of them looked down on the other. It doesn't matter if there is a tacit understanding when speaking, even the tone is the same. "Do you really not think about it?" Zhang Wanan turned back to tease. "Not consider. Not consider." It was all in unison again. At this time, everyone was speechless. However, they both knew very well that the two beautiful couples were waiting for their little enemies to become lovers to see how they would react when they were slapped in the face. They went to the amusement park in the morning. Two pairs of young lovers specialized in romantic games. A pair of young enemies suddenly disliked each other, and then began to hurt each other. They stopped playing romantic games, insisting on playing things that the other party did not like, and then looked at each other again. The other person's expression was laughter. For example, Hichayu didn't want to go to the haunted house, but Sujiaojiao wanted to go, so when he came out, what he saw was Hichayu's legs trembling, and then Sujiaojiao couldn't help but hold her belly and laugh at him. Another example is that Sujiaojiao didn't want to ride the roller coaster, so Hichayu forced her to play. Playing once was not enough, he had to play twice. Sujiaojiao was messy in the wind, and her voice was hoarse from shouting. When she came down, she couldn't stand still and even vomited. She almost fell to the ground. Hichayu laughed unkindly, supported her and patted her back. At the end of the day, both of them were losing, but the two couples who specialized in romantic projects enjoyed it very much. Everyone was exhausted after playing for a day. In the afternoon, we found a place to eat and then returned to the tent. The boys formed a team to play games, while the girls read novels, followed TV series or went shopping. Everyone has his own preferences. Asterisk. They played at the beach for a full 5 days before returning home. After playing outside for a long time, they were not very happy when they came back. They were all very lazy. So we discussed the next group outing in the car and decided where to go, but the specific time was not set, only an approximate time. "If you two still don't get along by then, don't follow us, or you will be tortured," Gu Jinchu said jokingly to Sujiaojiao and Hichayu. Then I saw two people with sad faces. What should they do? "So it's good if you guys get together." Gu Jinchu found the right time and started talking again. "Stop it, no one wants me, Sujiaojiao, and I can't be reduced to being with Hichayu," Sujiaojiao said with disgust. "Me too, not to mention that there are a lot of girls chasing behind me, Hichayu. If I weren't blind, I wouldn't be able to look down on Sujiaojiao," Hichayu said even more harshly. End of this chapter. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Lu family's wife is so sweet. Author, Yoon. Chapter 543. Chapter 543. It's not like a family doesn't enter the same house. Me too, not to mention that there are a lot of girls chasing behind me, Hee Chae-woo. If I weren't blind, I wouldn't be able to look down on Sujiao. Hee Chae-woo said even more harshly. The two of them looked at each other as they spoke, their eyes showing their disdain for each other. Since there are so many girls behind you, why don't you agree with one? Gu Jinchu asked again. Hee Chae-woo has been causing trouble with him these days. It's time for him to find something to do with him. Anyway, he is idle. This time, Hee Chae-woo, who had sharp teeth, suddenly fell silent. He didn't know how to refute for a moment. Thinking about it, many little girls had written love letters to him, and he basically threw them away as soon as he didn't read them. He would throw away some whims after just one glance, but why didn't he like any of them? What? I don't know what to say. Gu Jinchu raised his eyebrows and looked at him funny. For a moment, everyone in the car, except for the driver and Sujiao, who was not happy to see him, all turned their eyes to him. I'm too young, and I don't want to talk about it for the time being, can't I? He followed and his face turned red from a group of people. Hee Chae-woo sneered coldly and said, I've seen through everything and said, I don't know if it's because I'm young and I don't want to talk or because I have someone in my heart. I think it's the latter. Even loses who never liked joining in the fun, couldn't help but agree. I'm sleepy. Let's sleep for a while. Hee Chae-woo waved his hands blindly and then folded his arms together and closed his eyes. He didn't know whether he fell asleep or not. Sujiao glanced at him and crossed his arms and closed his eyes. The two of them fell asleep, and the other four people also fell silent and chatted with each other, and the car suddenly became quiet. It was already dark when they got home. There would be 6 children of the Lu family tonight. They all lived in the house, and the mansion became even more lively. Lu Lin and Lin 11 went out to play for 3 days. They had come back to work early. When they came back in the evening and saw a group of children, they were not surprised because the couple knew the information about the 6 of them coming back today and had even given instructions to them. Aunt Lu and Xiaolan went shopping for groceries. What surprised them was the new relationship between Gu Jinchu and Xiaoran. The two of them looked at Gu Jinchu and Xiaoran smiling mysteriously, just like Lu's smile when he discovered their relationship that day. Sure enough, it's not that family members don't come into the house, Gu Jinchu thought. Congratulations to you, it will last forever, Lin 11 said with a smile. For a long time, Lu Lin also agreed. Xiaoran has always been shy in front of the two of them, and this time she was so shy that she didn't know what to say. She just nodded her head and even forgot to say thank you. I'll take you back to see my parents another day, Gu Jinchu whispered to Xiaoran when they were the only children left in the living room. Huh? Is it too early? Xiaoran was a little worried. They just had a few days. Oh, the ugly daughter-in-law will have to meet her parents-in-law sooner or later, what should she be afraid of? Gu Jinchu said jokingly. You are ugly. Xiaoran glanced at him. Gu Jinchu chuckled and did not refute. Acquiescing, he continued, and my parents like to play around and don't take my biological son seriously. They have very good personalities, just like Zizu's parents. Same, so don't worry, Gu Jinchu said comfortingly. Yes, Xiaoran nodded. Let's meet her as soon as we meet her. We will meet her sooner or later. After all, she is not ugly. There is no such thing as an ugly daughter-in-law. But I have to go home first tomorrow, Xiaoran said suddenly. What? Are you scared away? You can ignore it first. Gu Jinchu thought she was scared. I'm not that timid, but I want to go back and see my dad. Although he has begun to recover, I always have to go back and have a look, otherwise I won't worry. End of this chapter. The Lu family's wife is so sweet. Author, Yoon. Chapter 544. Chapter 544 A False Alarm. I'm not that timid, but I want to go back and see my dad. Although he has begun to recover, I always have to go back and have a look, otherwise I won't worry. Gu Jinchu understood. He nodded and asked, "Shall I go back with you? Let's wait for a while. I'm afraid my dad will be angry when he sees you." Sioran said with difficulty. Huh? Isn't it possible? I know that your father doesn't like me before I've even met you. Gu Jinchu was instantly frightened and broke into a cold sweat. No, that's not what I meant. It's just that if my father knew that we were together, he would definitely be angry, because almost all fathers are like this, Sioran explained. Most fathers will be angry and sad after knowing that their daughter has been cheated by another boy. In addition, she and Xiaodong have been dependent on each other these years, so Xiaodong will definitely be unhappy when he sees Gu Jinchu. Gu Jinchu understood this time. It turned out to be a false alarm. I will try my best to let my uncle know that there is nothing wrong with you being with me, Gu Jinchu said. Good. Asterisk. The admission results have come out. The 3 people who have all applied to Nanjing University have received their admission notices one after another. They had a small gathering on the day they received the notices. Zhang Wanan went to have a big meal. This time they didn't drink, because they didn't need to say any more truths, so they just drank the drinks. But after finishing the drink, Zhang Wanan looked as if he was drunk, which was very abnormal. After the meal, the 4 of them sat there chatting. Zhang Wanan nuzzled into Lu Zizhu's arms as usual. Because he was used to it, Lu Zizhu didn't pay attention at first. He just rubbed her head and let her hump like a little piggy. Back and forth. But after a while, Zhang Wanan stopped arching. She sat up again and looked up at Lu Zizhu. Lu Zizhu lowered his head to meet her eyes. Her eyes were bright and full of Lu Zizhu. What's wrong? Lu Zizhu asked her. Zhang Wanan suddenly pursed her lips, her eyes instantly moistened, and her lips trembled a little. Lu Zizhu was shocked when he saw her like this, and asked again, "What's wrong?" Zhang Wanan's hand holding his arm gradually tightened, and suddenly her strength became too strong. Suddenly Lu Zizhu felt that the blood in his arm was no longer flowing. What's going on? Tell me. He was very panicked, but he still pretended to be calm and coaxed her to ask. The 2 people sitting across from each other looked at each other in confusion when they saw Zhang Wanan's appearance, not knowing what to do for a moment. What's wrong, Anan? Sioran also asked. If you are unhappy, tell your little Jojo that he has money and ask him to buy you good things, but don't wrong yourself, Gu Jinchu also coaxed her. Zhang Wanan still didn't speak, and looked at Lu Zizhu with tears in his eyes, looking very pitiful. Lu Zizhu felt very distressed, but he couldn't force her to say it if she didn't say it. He could only coax her patiently, "Can you tell me if you're unhappy? Don't keep it secretly in your heart." "I'm not unhappy," Zhang Wanan finally spoke. Lu Zizhu felt relieved as soon as she said a word, and asked again, "What's going on?" There were tears in his eyes. He didn't believe it when he said everything was fine. Zhang Wanan lowered her head and rubbed her face on his white shirt, then raised her head and sniffed. Except that the tip of her nose was a little red, it seemed like it was just an illusion, and her tears had been wiped away by her. "I'm just so excited. I'm happy for you," Zhang Wanan said. Lu Zizhu frowned slightly. Her words sounded like she was talking nonsense. The little girl could no longer tell lies without blinking an eye. He didn't believe it, but the 2 people opposite did. They patted their chests and said, it's okay, it's just a false alarm." Zhang Wanan. Is it that scary? End of this chapter. The Lu family's wife is so sweet. Author, Yoon. Chapter 545. Chapter 545. No one wants a long-distance relationship. They believed it was easy, but loses who didn't believe it. He stretched out his hand to pull Jongwanan up and said, "We are going back first. You two can do whatever you want." Jongwanan was suddenly pulled up and didn't react, but he still followed him obediently. Loses who stopped a car on the side of the road, and the two of them got in the car and prepared to go home. The car started, and Jongwanan lay obediently on Loses who's lap with her eyes closed and seemed to be asleep. Loses who looked down and looked again and couldn't help but scream. "Anan." "Yeah," Jongwanan responded softly. "So she's not asleep," Loses who thought, "then he can talk." "What happened just now, are you unhappy?" he asked. Jongwanan supported Loses who and suddenly sat down and looked out the car window and said impatiently, "I told you it's okay, why don't you believe me?" "It's okay," who would suddenly change their appearance and still have tears in their eyes. Loses who told her what she had just looked like without any politeness. "If I didn't say something and forced her to do something, she wouldn't know what she had just looked like, and she still insisted that it was fine." "Me," Jongwanan said without thinking. Loses who was choked for a moment, thinking that this would make him angry to death. Loses who sighed, sat down next to Jongwanan, and said, "I know, did you just remember when you were eating that you would be unhappy if I went to study in the future?" Jongwanan said nothing and kept looking out the window. Loses who saw that she was silent and continued, "Be good, I will come back to see you when I have time." Jongwanan's nose felt sore after hearing his words. She couldn't hold it back, and tears began to well up in her eyes again. She didn't turn around to look at Loses who, but still looked out the window and said, "I understand, but I just can't get used to it for a while." "Don't worry, just go and study." Loses who sighed. When he heard the little girl talking, he knew that the little girl was hopeless again and would secretly shed tears behind his back. Loses who reached out and turned Jongwanan to face him. The little girl was stubborn from the beginning. She was very strong and couldn't twist it anymore. Loses who used a little strength to turn her around and force her to face him. The moment Jongwanan turned around, Loses whose heart throbbed. As expected, she cried. She bit her lip tightly, not daring to cry. Loses who reached out to wrap his arms around the person and hugged her tightly, coaxing him, "Don't cry, be good." Jongwanan couldn't hold it back this time, didn't listen to Loses whose words, and cried out. It's not that she's being pretentious, it's just that she doesn't know what to do. She's used to being with Loses who. She's really not used to being separated like this. In the future, they will become what others call a long-distance relationship. She doesn't want to, but she can't help it. No one wants it. Loses who felt uncomfortable when he heard her cry. He couldn't see Jongwanan crying. Loses who didn't comfort Jongwanan for a while because he didn't know how to comfort her. The reason for her crying this time was different from before. He also followed Jongwanan's example and looked out the window in a daze. After a while, Loses whose deep voice reached Jongwanan's ears, which shocked Jongwanan's heart and revealed a surprised expression on his face. He said, "Anan, I'm not going, I'll stay here with you." Jongwanan was shocked and immediately pushed him away. She looked at Loses who in disbelief and asked with a tearful voice, "Are you kidding me? If he doesn't go, he will destroy his own future. Then she, Jongwanan, will be the culprit. When Loses who loses his future, she will be cast aside by others, saying that she is the culprit who holds Loses who back." Loses who smiled softly and said, "I'm not kidding, I'm serious." Indeed, Jongwanan could see that he was serious, so he had been looking out the window without saying anything just now. Was he thinking about this issue? End of this chapter. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Liu family's wife is so sweet. Author, Yoon. Chapter 546. Chapter 546, When did tears become worthless? Indeed, Zhang Wanan could see that he was serious, so he had been looking out the window without saying anything just now. Was he thinking about this issue? Zhang Wanan was already crying, but now she was anxious and moved after hearing his words. She thought about it and wiped away the unfulfilled tears on her face with the back of her hand. Zhang Wanan looked at Lu Zizhu and said seriously, "Just think it was an illusion. I didn't cry, and I didn't feel reluctant to leave you. Please don't stay, okay?" Her expression was more serious than Lu Zizhu's. At such a serious moment, Lu Zizhu couldn't help but laugh out loud. He looked at Zhang Wanan and asked, "Aren't you willing for me to stay?" The little girl's thoughts were changing so fast that he couldn't even keep up. Zhang Wanan shook his head vigorously and said, "No, I don't want you because I cut off your path. You still have a bright future. If you stay, you will be finished, and I will be cast aside." Zhang Wanan's voice became quieter the further he spoke. She is reluctant to let go, but she should consider others and not be too selfish. Just pretend that nothing happened just now. Zhang Wanan frowned and seemed to be pleading. Lu Zizhu couldn't see her crying, let alone seeing her like this, even if he begged him. He held Zhang Wanan tightly in his arms again. He stroked her hair with one hand and asked, "Do you believe me?" "Believe it," Zhang Wanan said without hesitation. She trusts everyone who is good to her. Lu Zizhu is so good to her, so she trusts him unconditionally. Lu Zizhu nodded, "Just believe it. I promise you that after I go to Nanjing University, I will never be a prostitute, nor will I associate with any girls. I will study hard and come back to see you when I have time," Lu Zizhu promised. Zhang Wanan said nothing, but Lu Zizhu felt her nodding and her chin touched his shoulder. "Anan, let me tell you a secret," Lu Zizhu said suddenly. Zhang Wanan was stunned and asked, "Do you have any secrets?" "Yes," Lu Zizhu said calmly. He felt that there was no need to keep this secret secret. "Then tell me." Zhang Wanan buried her head in his clothes and muttered. "When I was 12 years old, I signed a contract with my parents, which was..." Before Lu Zizhu could explain, Zhang Wanan suddenly raised her head and looked at him in surprise, and asked, "Are you marrying another girl?" She was too impatient and was simply making a wild guess. Lu Zizhu smiled helplessly and shook his head, saying, "No, just listen to me." Zhang Wanan nodded. She was not tired, so she kept looking up at Lu Zizhu. Lu Zizhu pondered for a moment and opened his mouth again, saying, "The content of the contract is indeed about marrying someone, but it is not about marrying another girl. What I signed is to marry Zhang Wanan," Lu Zizhu said and looked down at Zhang Wanan. The two people's eyes met, and Zhang Wanan was completely stunned this time. "I will marry you when the legal content is reached. That is the content of the contract. I signed it without hesitation at the time, that is, when I was 12 years old. No, maybe I have identified you earlier, so you don't have to worry, in my heart only." Lu Zizhu kept his eyes on Zhang Wanan as he spoke. Zhang Wanan's tears began to well up in her eyes again. Zhang Wanan closed her eyes. She felt that she was really worthless and wanted to cry at every turn. When did her tears start to become so worthless? "I no longer know. I believe in you, very, very much," Zhang Wanan said. Lu Zizhu nodded. He would not let Zhang Wanan down, not even in this life. How could the little princess be disappointed? No, he has to protect the little princess. "How did we get together? How did we get to this point?" Zhang Wanan suddenly remembered this question, and she stared at Lu Zizhu waiting for the answer. End of this chapter. The Lu family's wife is so sweet. Author, Yun. Chapter 547. Chapter 547. Take me away with you. How did we get together? How did we get to this point? Zhang Wanan suddenly remembered this question, and she stared at Lu Zizhu waiting for the answer. "We got together naturally, and we got to where we are now naturally," Lu Zizhu answered seriously. Zhang Wanan was speechless for a moment. It seemed that it was indeed like this. It seemed ordinary, but it was not ordinary. We are people who want to grow old, Lu Zizhu said. That snowy night has already turned white, Zhang Wanan replied. That snowy night, they were building a snowman outside. The snow was falling heavily, and the white snow was floating all over, as if it had a white head. That was a bald head, but we want to have a real bald head, Lu Zizhu said seriously. It's as if they were together naturally, and have come to this point naturally, and will naturally grow gray in the future, the kind of white hair that turns from black to white. Maybe you'll be a little earlier than me, Zhang Wanan suddenly teased Lu Zizhu. Lu Zizhu smiled. He was a few years older than her, so he might actually grow old earlier than she did. Then I will take good care of it and wait for you, Lu Zizhu said. The atmosphere between the two of them gradually became lively, and it was not as heavy as before. However, the driver who had been ignored in the front row was a little tired. Asterisk. The first day of school was getting closer, and Lu Zizhu started to pack his things. At the end of the packing, he carefully put a photo into his suitcase. It was the first photo he and Zhang Wanan took. He had always liked it and always very well protected. When putting one picture was not enough, he opened the drawer again. The drawer was filled with small photos, all of which were photos of her and Zhang Wanan, as well as some of Zhang Wanan's personal photos. Some of the photos looked like they were taken secretly. He couldn't help but raise the corners of his mouth when he looked at those photos, and felt sweet in his heart when he saw them. When Zhang Wanan came in from the outside, she happened to see Lu Zizhu holding a stack of cards and spreading them around the corners of the suitcase. She jumped over and squatted in front of Lu Zizhu and asked curiously, "What are you doing? Why are you stuffing so many papers, piece? These are all treasures, not just pieces of paper," Lu Zizhu thought to himself. Lu Zizhu stuffed another piece of paper, then looked up at Zhang Wanan, waved the so-called paper in front of her, and said, "It's not a piece of paper." After that, he lowered his head and started stuffing it again. Zhang Wanan only glanced at it but saw clearly that it was herself, so these were not pieces of paper, but photos of her. Lu Zizhu wanted to take a lot of her photos to school, and thinking about it, he felt an inexplicable warmth in his heart, and his heart became warm. "So it's not a piece of paper." She lowered her head and pretended to be shy. In fact, she was already happy. Lu Zizhu looked up at her and complained mercilessly, "Only a fool would think I was stuffing pieces of paper." Seeing that Lu Zizhu loved her so much, she should just endure it. Zhang Wanan stood up with a smile and walked around behind Lu Zizhu. Lu Zizhu didn't notice. He was taking the photo very seriously. Suddenly his body swayed. He quickly steadied himself. The little girl actually lay down behind him while he wasn't paying attention. On the back. "You're dead again." Lu Zizhu didn't scold her or drive her away, but complained in a low voice, which was a bit doting. Zhang Wanan laughed a few more times. She stretched out her hand from behind to rub Lu Zizhu's face. She was satisfied when his handsome face was deformed. Then she started to pull gently, saying while pulling, "Since you are so reluctant, take me with you." After showing the last photo, Lu Zizhu was about to stand up with the person on his back, but stopped when he heard these words. "This idea seems to be not bad," Lu Zizhu thought to himself. End of this chapter. The Lu family's wife is so sweet. Author, Yun. Chapter 548. Chapter 548. He was completely defeated. This idea seems to be not bad, Lu Zizhu thought to himself. Lu Zizhu smiled evilly and stretched out his long arm to pull the person behind him over. Zhang Wanan exclaimed and found that she was safely in Lu Zizhu's arms. False alarm. What are you doing? If you can't carry it anymore, just say so. There's no shame in it, and I won't laugh at you. I can get down by myself, Zhang Wanan said, and was about to break away from him. But after trying several times, she couldn't get away. She didn't know what kind of illness Lu Zizhu had, so he hugged her tightly. Zhang Wanan didn't try to pull away anymore. She just hugged his neck and asked lazily, "What's wrong? Where's the convulsion?" Lu Zizhu's deep pupils were staring at her at the moment, his eyes seemed to people in, and Zhang Wanan couldn't help but shudder. What's wrong with you?" Zhang Wanan asked cautiously. Lu Zizhu suddenly laughed, and then Zhang Wanan felt the world spinning. She exclaimed, and her desire to survive made her hold on to Lu Zizhu's arms and not let go. "It's okay, don't be afraid." Lu Zizhu patted her nervous hand and said. Zhang Wanan opened her eyes that were closed because of fear, and then realized that she had been thrown into the suitcase by Lu Zizhu. This childish fool actually took her words seriously. She knew that Lu Zizhu was just joking with her, because his suitcase could no longer accommodate her, and even if he could, he would not allow her to do so. Zhang Wanan hugged her legs and buried her head in them, laughing out loud, "Lu Zizhu, you are so childish." Lu Zizhu also laughed, thinking that he learned his childishness from you. Because he is such a cold person and never smiles, but after being with Zhang Wanan, he often behaves stupidly, sometimes even childishly, and sometimes even smiles like a fool like Zhang Wanan. His original personality has been changed by Zhang Wanan. He was completely defeated at the hands of Zhang Wanan and lost to Zhang Wanan. Lu Zizhu stretched out his hand, and Zhang Wanan naturally pulled it up and stood up from the suitcase. Lu Zizhu was childish again when he pulled her. He actually pulled Zhang Wanan hard and she fell into his arms. Zhang Wanan bumped into his strong chest and suddenly felt that this man gave her too much sense of security. She had been stuck in this man's arms her whole life. Inextricable. The two hugged each other for a while and then separated. Zhang Wanan said that he had something to give to Lu Zizhu, and then ran back to his room. When she came back, she was just as empty as when she went out. Lu Zizhu walked around her curiously a few times and asked, "Where are the things?" Guess Zhang Wanan raised her little face and smiled brightly. Her smile always makes people feel comfortable. People who have been tired for a long day will feel relaxed after just one look at Zhang Wanan's smile. Lu Zizhu circled around her again, but he couldn't see anything unusual. "Can't guess," he admitted defeat. Zhang Wanan said "Che" with disdain, and muttered, "Titles like genius are all fake, you can't even guess." Lu Zizhu was speechless for a moment. He was just good at studying, but he was not good at finding out anything from others. After all, he did not have a very sensitive sense of smell, unlike a dog. Zhang Wanan muttered while pulling up her long sleeves, revealing her delicate wrists. Lu Zizhu was taken aback and hurriedly held down her arm and urged her in a panic, "You can't do it, you can't chop off her hands." Zhang Wanan was confused and stared at him like a fool. Haven't this guy noticed yet? Did she even think she was going to give him her severed hand? She is not that cruel, nor is she that perverted. I don't know what's wrong with this guy's brain. He dares to think about anything. He's such a fool. Inexplicable dislike. End of this chapter. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Lu family's wife is so sweet. Author, Yun. Chapter 549. Chapter 549. It's a joke. I don't know what's wrong with this guy's brain. He dares to think about anything. He's such a fool. Inexplicable dislike. Zhang Wanan rolled her eyes, shook off his hand that was holding her wrist, and explained patiently, "I want to give you this." She pointed to the small rubber band on her wrist. Lu Zizhu stared at the familiar rubber band for a while and then suddenly realized. It turns out that a joke was just made. He scratched his head in embarrassment and laughed. Zhang Wanan also laughed, laughing at him like a fool. Zhang Wanan pulled his hand over and put the rubber band she had just taken off her hand on Lu Zizhu's wrist. She looked at it for a while, then clapped her hands with satisfaction and said, "Just right, perfect. Why do you give me this? Isn't this the one you often use?" "No need," Luzes, who looked at the thing in his hand curiously. This was the only thing on his body that was used by girls. Jongwon Han, she didn't want to give away her used rubber bands, but when she just looked for them, she found that there were no new ones, so she had no choice but to use the used ones. If a boy has this on his hand, it means he has a girlfriend. So, in the future, if someone asks you for a phone number or something, just raise your wrist and say domineeringly, "I have a girlfriend," Jongwon said seriously. "Teach him to reject girls." Luzes, who understood. He raised his hand to look at it again. It was pink and tender. He tugged on his sleeves and hid it. "Don't let others see it, otherwise the image will collapse." "What are you doing? What are you hiding?" "It's embarrassing," Jongwon asked fiercely when her sharp eyes caught sight. Pulled the sleeves again to reveal them. Jongwon was satisfied. He stood up on tiptoes and patted Luzes, who on the shoulder like a leader appreciating an employee, and said, "Perform well." Luzes, who nodded, wanting to behave well. Asterisk. Luzes, who started school one day earlier than Jongwon. On the day he started school, the whole family put down their work and went to see him off, including Tang Yu, who also rushed back to see him off at night. "You're so proud of your face, your mother-in-law didn't even take a break even after getting off the plane," Jongwon said jokingly to Luzes, who. Luzes, who smiled. He was very proud. His parents, mother-in-law and daughter-in-law all came to see him off. He was already a winner in life before he graduated, so he would float. Jongwon turned her head and looked at Tang Yu. She was resting now, her breathing was steady, and she seemed to be asleep. Jongwon felt inexplicably relieved. She didn't expect that Tang Yu could fall asleep in this environment. He could not do it before. "I can't even sleep." The family would talk a few words along the way, but not all the time. Jongwon sat next to Luzes, who all the way, holding his arm and not letting go. Luzes, who also held her hand tightly. They cherish the present very much. After all, they will not be able to see each other every day in the future. Even if they have a video call, it is not as good as actually meeting each other. Arrived at NTU at around 2 p.m. Jongwon stood at the door of the school and looked at the name of the school. She clutched the bag chain tightly with both hands, thinking that this is it. Quite fast. The adults walked in front one after another, but Jongwon stood there motionless, as if her feet were stuck. Luzes, who also stood on her side. After more than 10 seconds, Luzes, who reached out and grabbed her hand that was holding the bag chain. "Hold on tight." "Gone," he said softly. Jongwon finally came back to his senses and followed Luzes, who. When the two of them walked into the campus, Jongwon seemed to be dumbfounded. His face was expressionless and he didn't even want to say anything, so he just walked along. Luzes, who sighed in his heart. He knew that the little girl felt uncomfortable now, but she was unwilling to lose her composure like last time. Those adults said they were here to see Luzes, who off to school, but in fact they were here to see him off to campus again. They saw no one as soon as they entered the door. "Do you want me to take you for a walk first?" Luzes, who asked Jongwon. End of this chapter. The Lu family's wife is so sweet. Author, Yoon. Chapter 550. Chapter 550. I understand the jealousy. "Do you want me to take you for a walk first?" Luzes, who asked Jongwon. Jongwon nodded, then immediately shook his head and said, "Let's not go shopping anymore. You can take me shopping when I come next time." "Go get your things first," Jongwon said, looking at the freshmen coming and going in the school. The freshmen were busy getting things to go to the dormitory to clean up, etc. They had already arrived late enough, and it was not appropriate to walk around again. After all, the school is so big. Luzes, who was stunned for a moment, then held her hand and continued walking forward. Then let's go shopping next time. Yes, you should get familiar with this place first, but you can get familiar with it alone. You can go with a boy, but you can't go with a girl, Jongwon said while jabbing her face with one hand. She tried to adjust her emotions so that she looked normal, not slumped face. Loses who will be worried when he sees this. Jongwon poked her face and felt that she had gained a little fatter, and her face had more flesh and was soft. Loses who liked to pinch her face very much, and it would probably take a long time before he could touch her face again. It's weird with boys, Loses who complained. It seemed the same. Jongwon waved her hand. It doesn't matter, as long as it's not with a girl. Loses who nodded vigorously. I understand, I'm jealous, so you have to be obedient. I understand. Jongwon made an okay gesture with one hand, looking very cute and cute. Loses who didn't see the expression of reluctance or sadness on her face. He knew that the little girl was hiding her emotions, but that was fine, otherwise it would show on her face that he would feel uncomfortable in his heart, and he wouldn't know how to say goodbye after a while. Have Gu Jinchu and sister Ran been here a long time ago? Jongwon asked. Well, he ran out a long time ago. Gu Jinchu took photos of him to show off before he came. Gu Jinchu was abused by them before, but now that he has a wife, he no longer has to be abused. They even abuse him in return, but Loses who doesn't take it seriously at all. I heard from sister Ran that they met their parents. She tried not to talk about other people or the two of them today. Well, I see. Sioran's father almost ruined Gu Jinchu, saying that a good cabbage was just lost to a pig, but it is more of a blessing. You should accept it. From now on, it will depend on the fate of the two of them, Loses who said. Pig. Jongwon couldn't believe it, but after thinking about it, she realized it was right. She nodded. It's quite similar. Loses who smiled helplessly. Be careful during the military training, don't faint from the heat. Jongwon still couldn't help but bring the topic back to them. The others had nothing to say. My body is fine, don't worry, I'll call you every night after the military training, Loses who coaxed. One word is settled. As the two men spoke, they stretched out their hands to pull the hook. When Loses who went to the dormitory, Jongwon couldn't enter because it was a boys' dormitory. After watching Loses who go upstairs, she tapped her toes on the ground in boredom. Jongwon looked up from time to time. Loses who had only been up there for a while and she already missed him. It was time for her to go home soon. What should she do? Jongwon thought and sighed, squatting on the ground and hugging his legs. Poor, weak and helpless. She was squatting and wanted to go home and find something to do for herself, when a pair of shiny leather shoes suddenly appeared in front of her, interrupting her thoughts. At first glance, she knew that the shoes were not Loses whose. She had no interest in looking up and continued to think about what to do when she got home. At first I thought that the man was just staying for a while, but who knew that the shoes had not moved, and there was even a sound coming from above. Hi, little sister. He is greeting himself. Because the sun was so bright, Jongwon squinted her eyes and raised her head to look at him after hearing the sound. End of this chapter.